let's go around with that. I know I do. Research has saved a lot of my stories and made them more interesting. My one, Drawing Dead, I got half the book from research into 1930s New York. Half of where I went with my plot. What about?
With my first novel, I did more research about the creatures, because they're based on like animals that are living on present day Earth, and whether or not like an insect would do this or a reptile would do that, With my next novel, I'm trying to. It's set in India 200 years from now. So I found out I did a lot of online research, and something interesting I came across was that my city, Jaffa was originally Calcutta. But I found online that it's no longer called Calcutta in present day India. It's called Calcutta. So that's something I incorporated into the novel, and I have like a detective, so I researched, forensics, so like these little things that come up along the way, that you have to like make your story more believable. And then once you get in there, you have to like adhere to like the rules you set down, that a particular police officer wouldn't do like this work, because in chapter 2, that the commissar said this is the policy program, or like this is how somebody would be treated in the royal family, so you have to, once you set those rules down, after you've done the research work, you kind of have to stick to your own creative rules, to make the story believable.
Sure. Okay, I want to preface this by saying that I'm a librarian. I don't know how much else I need to say about that. So yeah, it depends on the book. So I wrote my first with one series. If I'm writing something, where am I going with that? Okay. If I'm writing something completely fantasy, I don't obviously research as much because I'm making it up myself. If I'm doing something like the Library of Athena series, which is all based in mythology, then yes, there's a lot more research based on culture and mythology, depending on which I'm doing. And then the steampunk one was set in Philadelphia in 1876, so I spent a lot of time on the free library site on the Centennial Exposition looking up stuff about that. So yes.
How do you describe the environment when you're writing fantasy? I mean, where do you come up with the ideas for what the town is?
Well, you have to describe it as if to someone as if they've never seen it. You could say it's a fishing village, but that may look like something different to 5 different people, and that's okay. You don't necessarily have to describe it down to every brick. If you're, say, a fishing village and some people think of little houses made of whitewashed clapboards, great for them. But if someone else thinks of it as stucco homes, and it depends on.
So you really don't be too descriptive with your fantasy.
It really depends. Like, I don't want to describe every brick and stone. I want to leave a little bit of it up to the imagination of the reader, especially if it's fantasy. Unless it's something that is important. If it's an important detail, then I have to say, hey, this house was larger than the rest, and it had, even then, it may be larger than the rest with a giant front door and lots of shiny windows, and the rest of it is up to the reader.
It's interesting. It makes a lot of sense for less is more when it comes to fantasy, because then you're allowing your writer, your reader to be creative within themselves.
Right. If what you're describing isn't necessarily fantasy.
Right, what she's saying, right.
But it works in regular fiction as well, that less can be more. You don't have to.
So if we're on a space or a fantasy, if I'm describing a dragon, and I could describe the dragon 5 different ways, but I may just say it was 20 feet tall with a very long neck and was green and black and big red eyes. And that's enough, because really, who wants to read 3 pages of what a dragon looks like?
And that's an important thing in a lot of writing, is important description versus what's not, frivolous or unnecessary.
Is it important to the story? They say that old thing, if you point out a gun to me over the mantle in Act 3, it better be in Act 1. It better be going off in Act 3. If you're taking the time to really point it out.
I would also add that as a fantasy writer, research is important. because it's not research out in the physical world, it's the research you do in your head so that you know what kind of a world these characters live in,
like
so
write
that
your
you
own
can
stuff
show
down,
it.
take your own notes and make up your own stuff. So I guess it's kind of research.
Yeah.
And if you want to research different kinds of economies and things to decide which one you want to use, you could do that too. I wouldn't say it's not like absolutely you have to do it.
Right.
But
It's neat, yeah. Regarding the description, one of the coolest things I ever heard is, when you think about it and go back and look at it, in Alice in Wonderland, he never describes Alice at all. Never. There's never a physical description given of Alice. You know, we all think of the Disney character, but it was left entirely up to the reader.
well, the illustrations in the book are pretty much the same.
We're taking it from.
John Grisham's The Testament. You never even know the main character's first name. You never know his name because it's a first-person story, and it's suspense, and it takes off from. It's just never stops. He never even has a name.
It lets the reader put themselves into it.
Because why
But anyway, we got a little derailed there. Doing research, yeah.
I love my favorite movie was Harriet the Spy. So my research is hands-on. Like I will never research anything, looking it up in the computer or reading a book on it. My first urban fiction series was funny because I didn't know, my second book, they were making crack. And I didn't know how you made crack because Google, wasn't
Really? It doesn't seem true?
So I ended up to a drug dealer and be like, how do you make crack? And he was like, what the? So I went to my car and I showed him my first book and I'm like, no, I'm the author and they're making crack in the second book and I don't know how to make crack. So he, told me how to make crack, and it was funny because I got a phone call from a distributor while I was sitting there with him, and I knew nothing about, I'm self-published, and now I have a small press, but I knew nothing at that time, and he was like, I thought the stores were supposed to buy my book retail, the price, I didn't know anything about wholesale. So the drug dealer actually brokered that deal since he found out I didn't know what I was talking about. And because of him, I sold 10,000 copies. He was like, no, you got to come up with that. How much it costs to print? No, it costs this much to print, so she going to be like that. And since that time, I've always, I interview cops, I go into prisons, I go into drug house, I interview prostitutes. Now that I'm writing paranormal fantasy, I went to one and try to find me some witches that I could talk to, and I found the community online, and I went and met a witch, and we talked. And I got to see all of her cool stuff. But long story short, it's I like to go into the field of whatever I'm writing and find out and talk to actual people and really badger. And they love it once they find out that you're an author. They tell you so much stuff. I was talking to this one lady and her husband was like, what? Huh? When did this happen? Am I responsible for this being over? There you go. But it just, stuff that they're willing to tell you as an author is just awesome. So that's how I research.
See, I had the opposite experience. I was trying to write a story about a tea room, and I tried to interview the woman who owned the local tea room, and she was acting like I was trying to steal her business or something. And I told her, I'm just writing a story. I just want to know, because my character has to prep the stuff in the morning. I just want to know what you do. What's your daily routine? And she wouldn't tell me hardly anything, and I'm thinking, and then I rushed me out of there as fast as she could. I was like, oh dang! I was like, that doesn't help.
Usually when I put those bad experiences online, people will help me with good experience. Go talk to Margaret on Zoom, she'll tell you this, that, and that. But so that's about as far as online researching I do. I'm like, y'all know anyone?
She went out of business anyway.
That's all right.
Nothing want to
No, it was actually the one that used to be in Pittman.
Oh, yeah.
And she's like, well, since you're here, I'll just keep
the one in Mulligan Hill when I visited Simmons.
Oh, that was a great tea room too, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
it was nice.
Yeah, the one that you had to go downstairs and it was
in
lace
Mulligan Hill.
curtains and all that.
So,
Mulligan.
Jen?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was nice.
Research. I do a lot of research as far as I love researching character names. All my characters, their names have a meaning, and there's a history behind them and a reason and a rationale why they're called what they're called. Also, the book I published and each subsequent that'll be in the series all has to do with magic from different cultures. I feel like every culture in the world has a magical tradition of some kind. So I've done a lot of research on magical traditions in different Asian countries, in West Africa, in the Brujo down in South America, and and the book I just published has to do with Italian folk magic. Now with that, I have personal experience. My family has a tradition, an Italian tradition of Italian folk magic. So I was able to ask my very Italian grandfather, who quietly, unbeknownst to his entire family, was a tarot reader and a seer, and so when I was very young, he realized I shared that with him, and so as I was researching the book, I spent a lot of time talking to my grandfather about his experiences and his family's experiences in Italy, and was able to bring that. So I do like talking to people. Plus, I know a lot of witches. so I do and feel like in the books that I write, everyone has a different power and a different connection. So I like meeting people and interviewing and speaking to people who have different experiences. One may be a tarot reader, one may be a medium, one may be an herbalist, and a friend of mine had a shop, and he had something like 150 different types of herbs and spices and roots and things like that, and he was closing his shop and was like, I'm just gonna dump this. And he literally gave me all of his herbs. Wow. Talk about, you're taking over. I have no dining room. I have an office and pretty much an apothecary set up in my dining room now because of this. But it's talk about helping the writing process when one of my characters is mixing up a concoction. I can physically go and, well, what the heck is a tonka bean? And I can, or calendula, or what is that? And I can actually see it, smell it, make tea from it.
Nice.
So yeah, I like to do the hands-on research too.
All right, so I'll stick with you. I'm just going to go back and forth around because I was going to jump around, but I'll lose track of who talked and who didn't. So it's easier just to go back and forth. So what's your draw to horror and the paranormal? Like what brought you into this?
Well, again, I think from a very young age, it was my mother, when storms were coming, she wouldn't wait for the lights to go out. She would turn the lights out and pull out Edgar Allan Poe or the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And she would light candles and we would read stories. And so it started with that. Just being an avid reader of that type of literature, and then on to Anne Rice and from there. But then I think also, my personal experience, and with my grandfather being a tarot reader and a seer. Plus, I talk a lot, so it got to the point where if people would okay, shut up, so I would write it down instead. I had all of these ideas as far as ghost stories and I just to me it was like I need to write this down. So it was a mixture of the reading and that history with my mom, my grandfather, things like that I pulled in.